Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with the daily update for January 27th, 2021. The main focus today is going to be the strategic danger which has to be addressed. It appears there's a return to the Bush, Obama, Biden policies of confrontation, of geopolitical provocations with Russia and China. Now, there was a significant development yesterday, which was it appears to be an agreement to extend the START agreement for 5 more years. It's about to expire as of next week, and this was an ongoing danger that would lead to an accelerated arms race between the United States and Russia. This was the one positive which came out of the talks between Biden and Putin yesterday, where they discussed a number of things, but the most positive was the agreement to move ahead with signing an extension of the existing treaty and use the next period ahead to come up with more extensive and a full agreement on nuclear weapons. And that would end the nuclear arms race. Now, in the meantime, though, much of what was discussed on Biden's side with Putin was provocative nonsense, but extremely dangerous. For example, Biden said he protested the ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine. I'll talk about the Ukraine situation in a moment, but this is an absurdity. Secondly, the SolarWinds hacking case, the cyber hack that was blamed on Russia, and people who blamed it on Russia, including John Brennan and others, admitted they had no evidence for this, except it looks like Russian interference. And they refer that back to Russiagate. Well, Russiagate was a fraud. The idea that Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee computers, Podesta's computers, has been discredited, debunked. It's not true. Even the cybersecurity firm that investigated it admitted they had no evidence of a Russian hack. And yet Biden threw this into Putin's face, the idea that Russia hacked the SolarWinds and that therefore this must stop. He also brought up alleged interference in the U.S. elections. As I said, this was never proven. There was no evidence. And this is just a continuation of Russiagate in another form. Then the Navalny case, accusing Russia of poisoning Navalny and criticizing Putin for the arrests of protesters from last weekend's march. And I'll get to that in a moment. But it's an absolute example of naked hypocrisy coming from President Biden. And then finally, he brought up the charges that Russia paid bounties or the allegations that Russians paid bounties to Afghan jihadists for every American soldier killed in Afghanistan. This was a story in the Washington Post which was never confirmed. Intelligence and military people denied it. President Trump said it was investigated and there was nothing there. And yet Biden is bringing this up when he talks to Putin. This is nothing but provocative nonsense. It puts us back into a strategic geometry of a potential war with Russia. And then there's the efforts to cancel the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the pipeline that brings Russian oil and natural gas to Germany, which is 90-something% completed. It includes 12 European nations, but especially Germany. But the efforts to impose sanctions on the companies that built the pipeline and that will market the oil is nothing but a provocation against Russia and Germany. Now, the whole idea, as the Biden press secretary put it, that Biden confronted Putin on Russia's malign actions in the world. Well, after Russiagate was proven to be the ultimate fraud, the hyper-conspiracy theory that there was a Russian collaboration with Trump to steal the election in 2016, that was completely debunked. Even Mueller, after 2.5 years and millions of dollars spent and trying to coerce people to lie, could come up with nothing to prove there was Russian intervention. Now, as an example, you have the Ukrainegate witness, Vindeman, who was eventually fired by the Trump administration, who was lying about the call to the Ukrainian president by President Trump. So you had this ongoing series of escalations, of attacks. You had an impeachment based on the Ukraine call. And it all amounted to nothing except an effort to interfere with President Trump's desire to break with the Bush and Obama paradigm of confrontation, of NATO expansion eastward, of regime change operations against Russia and President Putin. That's all it was. And some of that stopped under President Trump, although the British continued to use things like the Skripal case, the allegations of Syrian chemical weapons use, which also have been debunked, including by top investigators from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, even though ultimately that organization put out a report saying that Syria did it with Russian backing. So this has been nothing but a series of provocations coming from the Anglo-American intelligence community, NATO, and people like John Brennan, Clapper, who says the Russians are genetically incapable of democracy. Now, this is coinciding with a whole new escalation against Russia. This includes the Pelosi-Hillary Clinton confab on a podcast where they essentially said, who benefited from the riots on January 6th? Putin. What did Russia have to do with what happened on January 6th at the Capitol? Then you have anti-Putin hacks like the so-called journalist Masha Gessen, who gets a large amount of money writing anti-Putin diatribes in the New Yorker magazine. She has a major public relations piece on Navalny about what a courageous fighter he is, how he's pushing the boundaries for democracy, and his anti-corruption fight is beginning to take hold. And it has this absolutely fraudulent claim that Putin built a $1 billion mansion, which has a $26,000 leather couch and a $50,000 antique table in his dining room. You know, this is the kind of stuff that even fiction movies, maybe you'd find something like this in a 1960s James Bond movie. But let's look at the Ukraine situation in a little more depth. The idea that Biden is challenging Putin on the Russian role in Ukraine, what about Biden's role in the coup? Biden was the point man for the Obama administration, where he worked with right-wing neo-Nazi Azov Battalion and the Bandera Group to shoot up Maidan Square as a pretext for a regime change coup, which was funded by the likes of George Soros, the National Endowment for Humanities, and for Democracy rather, the NED, and neocons like Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, who admitted to paying $5 billion to fund the coup. Biden was involved in that. Furthermore, he bribed the Poroshenko regime by threatening to withhold aid unless the prosecutor, Shokin, who was looking into the Burisma case, was fired. Now, none of this has ever been prosecuted. No one's ever brought up, including President Trump. President Trump got diverted by Giuliani into the corruption case against Hunter Biden and Burisma, which is a dirty deal, and maybe Joe Biden profited from it. But that's penny ante compared to Biden's role in pulling off a coup against a sovereign nation as a pretext to move NATO troops to the eastern border of Ukraine on the border with Russia. That kind of provocation could lead to nuclear war. That's what Biden did. And for him to say that Putin somehow is aggressive in Ukraine because the Russians helped the Russian ethnic population of eastern Ukraine from genocidal assaults coming from the Kiev government is the height of hypocrisy. Now, as for the Navalny case, protesting the human rights violations of arresting demonstrators, Putin made 2 points. One is that of all the people who were arrested in Moscow for the weekend demonstrations, almost all of them were released the next day, and only a small number of them will face administrative fines for their activity. Now, Putin compared that to what's happening to the people who were involved in the January 6th riot at the Capitol, where people are facing 15 to 25-year jail terms, where there's an escalation of censorship, where there's going to be a new Patriot Act to increase the surveillance and disruption of opponents to the Biden administration. And Putin raised the question, why should illegal actions be tolerated in Russia, but not in the United States? So it's a good point, and it's something that Joe Biden should think about if he's capable before he goes off on these attacks on the Russian government. Now, similarly, on the threat, there were 2 U.S. naval vessels that were just sent into the Black Sea. One is the USS Donald Cook, which is a destroyer, and the other is a refueling ship called the USNS Laramie. And in doing this, the U.S. military said these are to promote stability. Warships in the Black Sea, right next to Russia. Well, judge for yourself. Is this a sign of cooperation and peaceful intent? So why the escalation against Russia right now? Well, first, it continues the anti-Trump Russiagate story. And it covers up for the fact that the whole of Russiagate was to undermine Donald Trump's intention of breaking with the strategic geometry left to him by Bush and Obama, which was highly destabilizing and dangerous. And had Hillary Clinton become elected, threatening to set up a no-fly zone over Syria, it would have been a short step to a war with Russia. And secondly, they're going after the Russians because it's pretty clear Russia will not go along with the Great Reset, which is the major push coming from the West to deal with the collapse of the financial system. Why not collaborate on such things as the collapse of the financial system to put the economy in the world back on solid footing? Why not collaborating on dealing with the pandemic? Instead, this kind of warlike language puts the world on the course toward World War III, which could be a nuclear war by miscalculation. Now, this is where Lyndon LaRouche's proposal that sovereign nation states, especially powerful ones like Russia, China, and the United States, and India,